Thank you for logging in to today's webinar sponsored by Customerville and the CXPA. We're excited to bring you the topic today of emotions and the impact in the customer experience. Speaking today are two experts in the industry, Diane Majors, the CEO of the CXPA, and Max Israel, the CEO of Customerville. I'd like to encourage you to ask questions throughout today's session using the webinar technology, and remind you that a recording of today's webinar will be available on the CXPA website. So once again, thanks for joining the CXPA in Customerville today. And next, I'll turn it over to Diane Majors.
Hey, welcome everybody. Max, are you there?
I am indeed. How are you?
Great. It's wonderful to be with you today to talk about a very strong and powerful approach to building on customer experience in a more dramatic way. I'm going to share a little bit about creating kind of these moments that matter and talk about the power of emotion, but also how you can use emotion in business. And Max, you want to talk a little bit about what you're going to share today?
I'm going to talk about the physiology behind emotions and how they shape our decisions and also our memories.
Fantastic. Memories are a huge part of what we do as consumers. So just a little introduction to Customerville. For those of you who don't know Customerville, they are a platinum sponsor for 2017 for the CXPA. They've been a 13-year player in enterprise feedback software, looking for everything from international airlines to healthcare providers. They believe that customer experience feedback is actually part of the experience, right? We talk about surveys and feedback being a touch point, and so their focus is really to bring a unique blend of art, technology, and other disciplines into that touch point. So we welcome them as a platinum sponsor and today on our webinar.
Great to be here.
So let's get started. Thank you. Let's get started. Talking a little bit today about the power of emotion and customer experience with that customer as kind of our North Star. I'd like to get started with a little question for you, Max, actually. Can you share with me the last time you had an organization or brand where you were wowed? And I'd ask the audience to really think about the last time they were wowed by a brand. Max, can you share something, a story with us?
I can. You know, the thing that jumps to mind actually wasn't that recently. It was, I'm dating myself, it was almost 20 years ago. It was, of all things, a health insurance company. And I had definitely a wow experience. Do you want me to tell you what it is?
Yeah, what happened?
This is the better part of 20 years ago. We had an employee, and English was not her first language, and she filled out health insurance forms, and then one day her husband got sick and needed a surgery, and guess what? She had just through not understanding this blizzard of paperwork, had not put her husband on the health insurance plan, and it was the kind of thing that'll bankrupt a family. We called the health insurance company and explained it, and do you know what they did? They said, I mean, what do you think would happen if you call your health insurance company and say, by the way, my husband isn't on the policy, it hasn't been for the last year, and needs this expensive surgery? What this company did was they said, you know, we trust you. You say you intended to do it, and we believe you're being honest, and we know that sometimes those forms are incredibly complex, and we're sorry about that. You know what, let's go ahead and retroactively put him on the insurance. And
wow, that's a wow moment.
It was a wow moment. It was just amazing. It was amazing.
A very emotional time in the life. So do you still purchase from that healthcare provider?
Absolutely, I do. Yeah, we every family, I tell everybody to use them. Our family, I'm the CEO of a company, and guess who our insurance company is? Proud that they're actually a client of ours too now. I'm just very, that whole idea of, you know, when something goes wrong with health insurance, you're always worried, ooh, are they going to kind of really be there for me? But they were the first ones to step out and say, you know, we trust you. We trust you. It was really cool.
You know, that reminds me of something my husband and I have on our refrigerator. It says, you never know when you're making a memory. So you never know what interaction is going to create that or what decision or policy, right? So it's really impactful. Thanks. So on the other side of the coin, I'd like the attendees to really think about a bad experience. Now, this is often where you actually can start to feel, as you think about that memory, you can actually feel those emotions, which Max is going to talk about in just a little bit. But Max, share a bad experience you've recently had with an organization or brand.
Oh, bad one. I've got one for you. So I've flown into Atlanta several times in the last few months, and a company who shall remain nameless, where I rent a car from them, and you show up late at night, and you have to schlep all the way to where the car rental place is, and for whatever reason, this has happened 3 times in a row, 5 employees behind the counter and 20 or 30 customers. And it's like they're trying to piss us off. They're moving really slowly. They're socializing between each other. There's absolutely no sense of urgency, and you're just standing in line. You're wiped out. You just want to get your car and go. And I can just feel myself getting angrier and angrier.
I can actually hear it in your voice. So do you still rent from that?
I'm actually. I do. I see thinking it's going to get better. I may have to reevaluate that. I mean, what I have to do is it's a company deal. I mean, I'd have to go to the person in our company who controls that contract and say, cut them off, no more, we're done.
You're kind of trapped, aren't you? We, both of us in the B2B space, sometimes have customers that feel trapped like that, right? So we still have to be careful, because I'm sure the word of mouth and even sharing that story, if you were to say the brand, would have an impact on them.
Yeah.
So those are just demonstrations as you all think about your own experiences, where we really are talking about, and Max brought it up in both, and I'm sure as you were thinking about it, really bringing up those emotions and describing how we're feeling, and we're describing our behavior. So that theme will kind of carry us through what we're going to talk about today. Because one definition, and there's many of customer experiences, it's really the perception of the interaction they have with us. So it's not just the process and not just the things that happen, but how the customer actually perceives that. It's knowing and performing against those needs and expectations, so the need to have that surgery or the need to get in and out quickly, and what we expect to have happen. But it's also about those emotions we create with every interaction, and that's kind of where we're going to focus today. So talking a little bit about that and just starting to share a little bit about emotions and thinking and behavior, we want to share with you a statistic that came from Beyond Philosophy in this diagram, and lots of studies that have talked about we as human beings are only about 15% rational and conscious, right? So we often think, hey, I'm making this decision, but lo and behold, we're very emotional and subconscious and sometimes irrational creatures, making decisions and our behavior on things that we might not even notice or think about as we go through our lives. So really critical here to understand when we're talking about decisions that customers make in their behavior, that a lot of that comes from these emotions and the subconscious. And to give you an example of subconscious, Max, can you take a look at this picture? Sorry, slide's not advancing. Take a look at this picture. To all of you, look at this picture. What do you notice about this? This is a picture from a closet in a hotel chain to be unnamed. What do you notice about this?
That's the famous skinny coat hanger is the first thing that jumps out at me. I see about 100 of those a year. 100 of those. What is it with those? Why do they do that? Why did they do that?
What is it with those, right? That's exactly right. So I'm sure along the line somebody said, hey, in operations, we're losing a lot of hangers. People are taking them home. These are nice hangers, right? And somebody said, well, why don't we create a hanger nobody wants to take? It won't fit on their rods at home. Great, brilliant idea, right? So they put these, they changed out all the rods to these very skinny rods and these skinny little hangers. But I want to ask the audience and you, Max, when you see this, subconsciously in your mind, what's the message that really comes across to you?
It's not quite as bad as chaining the television remote to the bedstand. But I mean,
that could be it too.
It's that even though you're there spending $400 a night in New York City or whatever, we don't trust you.
Right, right. So while you may see that and it might seem rational to you, or you just kind of your brain just kind of takes it in, there's this subconscious and emotional reaction to that, right? And right. that reaction and that emotion can actually drive our behavior. Again, we'll talk about that just a second. So it's really important that when we think about these functional things we're doing in organizations, we have to be aware of the emotions that we're creating and subconsciously the messages we're sending to folks. Yeah. So here's another example of that. We'll just make sure the slides are advancing. We all have functional needs we need met. So, right, Max, you said you needed to rent a car, right? The task that we're trying to complete is a functional need. So, as I think about women, and we have to carry things with us all the time, usually everything in the kitchen sink, right? We need important things close to us at all times. We need a shoulder bag so our hands are free because we have lots of things to do. And I need to get inside a bag quickly. So a cotton canvas tote really works, right? $5.98, or even one of those that I picked up at a trade show somewhere, can meet that need. But when we look at the power of meeting both functional and emotional needs, I'll give you an example of this. My emotional needs related to this are a little bit different. Sure, that'll work, but what really motivates me, what really drives me are those subconscious and emotional needs. So I want people to know I'm successful. I don't need to be seen as in, right, in the in crowd. I want something really special, and I want to reward myself. So a Coach Tote would probably do that. The important thing to look at here is if you look at those two things, functionally they do the same thing. But if you look at what needs are being met by each one, there's a vast difference in how we're meeting functional and emotional needs. And pay attention closely to the price that we're able to charge for meeting those emotional needs. So this is an example from Oracle where they've talked about the power of meeting both functional and emotional needs. So critically important to provide value and to meet those needs where we can actually charge more or engage customers more because we're meeting those needs in a different way. As a matter of fact, Forrester...
Do you have that?
No,
coach?
I do not. Maybe for Valentine's Day I'll get it.
There we go.
So Forrester just did a study last year on emotion, and we've all been talking about effectiveness and ease, which are really functional things, right? It's easy to do and it's effective. But emotion can actually influence a customer's behavior more than those two things. So this is why we thought this topic would be really critical for us to discuss with you. Max is going to share a little bit more about what's emotions and how they really drive us. And at the end, we'll kind of wrap it up and say, okay, how do I use emotion in my organization and talk about the importance of it. So Max, you have to share with us, what's an emotion? How does it influence how we make decisions?
Yeah, that's a great question, isn't it? What is an emotion? This is a really exciting time in CX because in a lot of places, really for the first time, we're talking about how integral emotions are to a great customer experience. And yet, the truth is that very few people actually understand what an emotion is. I mean, physiologically, what it is. And that's a problem because you're going to need to know this if you're going to understand how it shapes future decisions. Let's take a look at the next slide. I'll tell you a little bit about what I mean. The timing is good to talk about this. I'll share some materials that shed some light on this based on research that drives our own thinking. This is part of a presentation we share with some of our clients called When Emotion and Reason Collide. And by the way, why do we do this? Customerville, I think a lot of you know us as a software company. But look, I mean, for a long time, we felt that the act of sharing feedback ought to be emotionally satisfying. It is between two people. Why can't it be when we use technology? Because if it's not emotionally satisfying, all sorts of bad things happen. And so that's why we study this in order to kind of do our jobs better. Let's go ahead and advance to the next slide, and I'll start with a really good place to start before we bring together emotion and reason. Let's start with this guy, the guy who famously separated them. We all remember René Descartes from, I guess, freshman year of college, and he famously said, "I think, therefore I am." That was kind of the start of what people call mind-body dualism. And even with this guy is such a powerful and important thinker in history that even 250 years later, it's still so central to our way of thinking about ourselves and our consciousness that it still pervades everything. I mean, this idea that you have your brain, your logical sense, and then your sort of visceral emotions that are a completely separate deal. When was the last time, Diane, can you remember saying something like, well, you got to use your head, or in my heart, I know something? Have you ever?
Yeah. Yeah, the head thing with my teenagers, right? You got to use your head, but they're emotional creatures as I am.
They are.
Absolutely true.
And with all due respect to Monsieur Descartes, it's wrong. And much of this is wrong. And the problem with that is that it skews our thinking and our actions and even our professional decisions in ways that aren't very helpful. Let me introduce you to somebody a little more contemporary that you really need to know. That's this guy, Antonio Damasio. And he is, if you are in CX, if you create customer experience, or like me, you measure customer experience, or you're in the business of coaching it, you must know this man. You must read his book. You got to know this guy, because he is really the one who, for the first time, changed this idea that you have two selves, this logical self that's making all these decisions, and then sort of this nebulous emotional thing. And the quote that'll really stick with you is this idea that we're not thinking machines that feel. Rather, we're feeling machines that think. Just like Diane said, 85% of what you're doing during the course of your day is driven by emotion. It's not driven by this sort of logical thought process. And so I really want you to know this guy. And what's interesting is that his somatic marker hypothesis completely changed the way we look at emotion. We now believe emotions play a central role in social cognition and decision making. So I'm going to show you about that now. First of all, before we move on,
and you said there was benefits to folks who were coming to the webinar today. So tell us about this one.
I knew you were going to let me off the hook on this. So this is you can have a copy of his book. He really introduced to the world most people like me. The first time we learned of Antonio Damasio was with his book Descartes' Error. It is fascinating. If you are in CX, you have to have a copy of this book. It's just one of those essential things. And so if you don't have it, just send an email to bookclub@customerville.com. With your information. We'll send you a copy, Compliments of Customerville on the CXPA. You have to have it. And when you get it, you'll learn, you can see it says Descartes' Error, Emotion, Reason, and the Human Brain. And then there's this funny thing that looks like a giant railroad spike or something under it. The story behind that will fascinate you. I'm not going to spoil it for you, but you'll love this book. Do send an email and we'll get a copy right over to you.
All right. So let's talk about that emotion.
Let's do it. All right. So what is an emotion? Let's do this in two steps. First of all, an emotion is a change in your brain and, according to Damasio, your body in response to a stimuli. And so just kind of, diving a little deeper on that, you can think of it this way. According to his somatic marker hypothesis, somatic markers are feelings in the body we associate with certain emotions. And this will sound familiar to you. A rapid heartbeat, you associate that with anxiety. Nausea, for example, you associate that with disgust. And they strongly influence our decision making. When you're faced with a complex situation or a nebulous situation, and guys, this is like every situation if you're a human, your brain activates these physical reactions. It says, hey, I've seen this situation before. And then it fires a series of biochemical events that you experience as an emotion, and it causes you to react in a certain way. That's why emotions play such a vital role in making really fast, pretty darn rational decisions in the face of complexity. Let's do a little exercise here. This will be fun. I call it the Barky Dog thought exercise. We'll show you on the next slide. I call it the Barky Dog exercise because one of my kids, my youngest, my son Jared, when he was very little, something just happened to that kid. He didn't get bitten or anything, but he developed a fear of dogs that barked. And that somatic marker was placed in him, and he would not even go down the street. If he knew there was a dog there, even in the stroller, he wouldn't let you go down there. When he knew there was a barking dog, even if it was on a leash and in a yard, he would not go near there. He had a definite emotional reaction. He'd climb out of that stroller before he'd let you go. What was happening there? Well, let's look at what was not happening. Imagine it's you and this dog, and let's imagine you find yourself confronted with this terrifying spectacle. What's not happening is this. You're not saying, a furry quadruped. It appears that the quadruped is barking very loudly, my, those are some teeth you have. He's getting pretty close. Let's see, let's do a little mental whiteboard session. Furry quadruped plus barking plus teeth plus close by me equals, I guess running away right now is going to outweigh the benefits of staying where I am. I believe I'm scared. That's ridiculous. That's not what's happening. And yet we actually talk about human decision making, especially among consumers, as though that's how we thought. Here's what really happens. Your heart rate leaps, your muscles tense, you have an intense desire to flee. And later, if you're like me, like about, a minute later after you've run the fastest mile of your life and you're home safe, you reach the logical conclusion that that was a dangerous dog. What really happened, if you look at the first of those three things, before you had a single logical thought, your body responded. It ran a kind of pre-programmed macro, and it was giving you the result of a very special part of your brain, which catalogs those markers and runs them, again, like macros. Actually, what happened here is you've got a surge of a chemical called glutamate from your amygdala, and a release of some molecules into your blood stream from your endocrine system. So you didn't think it through. You had an emotional reaction that caused you to act. Basically, think of it this way. The way somatic markers work is that as you go about your day, you're going to find yourself in situations, and very often, the majority of the time, you'll see a situation, in this case a barking dog, based on some things that are just in our genome, augmented by our personal life experiences. That somatic marker in your brain, we'll talk about the mechanics of this. They're going to make you feel B, so you do C. It's a shortcut that allows you to react very quickly and, from an evolutionary point of view, kind of stay alive. Let me show you where this magic happens. This is a part of your brain, a very special part of your brain called the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. And again, this is the part of your brain where somatic markers, remember a somatic marker is where your brain takes in an event and fires off some chemicals that make you feel an emotion. That's where they're thought to be processed. And those changes are changes in your body and your brain. And again, it bears repeating that when you're faced with a given situation, the emotions you feel allow you to kind of take this very fast acting, very accurate course of action. I'm going to show you something now, guys, that's going to just drop your jaws. Let's advance to the next slide. I want to show you how they identified and how Antonio Damasio identified this part of the brain, this very special part of your brain, and really discovered that, in fact, we don't have these kind of, emotions aren't kind of this wishy-washy thing, that they're core to how we make, guys, almost every decision we make in our day-to-day. They developed something called the Iowa gambling task, which actually, I think if I recall this correctly, it was done not for the first time. He did it the second time at the University of Iowa. That's why they call it this. So this is going to floor you. Pay attention, guys. You're not even going to believe it when I tell you this. Participants in this test, and this has been repeated hundreds of times, hundreds of different studies, they were given 4 decks of cards on the computer screen. And some of those decks are statistically likely to be winners, and some are statistically likely to be losers. And what you're doing in this little exercise is you're borrowing money, and then you're going to bet and try and make money and hopefully not end up bankrupt, right? And it's a fun little game, but it's actually kind of stressful, the idea of borrowing money and gambling it. And what's interesting about this is that healthy participants, that means people who have functioning prefrontal cortexes, they actually got pretty good at sticking to winners, even after just 40 or 50 draws. So what's happening there? They're not counting cards. This is a couple hundred cards. What's really amazing is this. Even though they got good after 40 or 50 draws, even after just 10 draws, guys, take a minute and think about this. 10 draws. A galvanic skin response test, which is a special kind of test that measures even incredibly minute changes in moisture in your skin. You're sweating as a result of stress, right? Even after just 10 draws, a galvanic skin response test shows a stress reaction when you're just hovering over a bad deck. Isn't that absolutely amazing? Your brain is incredibly powerful at this. It's helping you through your emotions in this special part of your brain, make a great decision. You're thinking. You don't know you're thinking. You're learning when you don't know you're thinking. After just 10 draws, you put your hand over that deck and suddenly you feel awful. You feel something very bad. And up until now, before this webinar, you'd say, I've got kind of an instinct or an intuition. You'd use a kind of meaningless word like that. That is not what's going on. What's going on is this incredibly powerful part of your brain is learning so fast that you didn't even know it was there. And it's giving you an emotional response to guide your decisions. I think let's look at the next slide. It bears kind of repeating. So I'll put this up on the screen one more time because I want you to remember this. The fact that with 4 decks of cards, after just 10 draws, you placed a somatic marker in that part of your prefrontal cortex. Already your emotions were guiding you. That's how core they are. So the next time somebody tells you that this or that part of the experience in your customer journey stinks, but it's only your call center or the billing document we send the guy in the mail or some other thing, the customer will never really think about it. You tell them about this superpower that we all have. I think the most important quote, the thing that really sticks with me that Damasio said was that it's wrong to think that only brains can think. It's not. Your body thinks. They're even more powerful than we know. Your emotions don't guide or influence your decision-making process. Guys, they are your decision-making process, as Diane said, 85% of the time. I think that's just absolutely amazing. And if you're thinking that way, you're thinking about how in every moment you're processing this, it kind of changes your thought process in terms of how you evaluate what is a good customer experience, what is not, what is our goal. Let's take a look at why this is important. Well, the first thing is your body remembers. We're constantly producing what they call physical affected states in the people with whom we interact. This is true of all of us. It's true professionally. It's true in our personal lives. Diane, you asked me about a lousy customer experience I had that it affected me. Standing there in line at that car rental place for not the first time and watching employees who really just didn't even care that they were there, moving slowly while I was late and exhausted, definitely put me in a physical affected state. And the next time I see their logo, I'm going to feel that way. I'm not going to do a little pro and con, right? I'm going to working with that company. But it's also important because just kind of thinking about thinking about this in steps. The ventromedial prefrontal cortex is always on, right? And so because it's always on, we're always coding these somatic markers. You're always either gaining ground or you're losing it in I guess, the emotional eyes of your customer. You're thinking about your customer, but also the people who are your friends and your coworkers, your family members. There's never a time where you hit timeout, right? The Iowa gambling task, you code a marker after 10 draws. I mean, just think about that. You're coding a somatic marker after just 10 draws. That's incredible. You might think you're still thinking of it logically, but your body's already made the call. And last but not least, we create markers. I guess if you're on this call, it's probably because to some extent or another, you're either creating customer experience, you're in the business of creating customer experience, or you're measuring it or coaching on it. But that's one of the things we do. If you think about it that way, when we think about our interactions with customers, and we do this at Customerville, we do this all the time, you're always asking, what emotion did we want to evoke? What's actually happening? What did we evoke? But then we also need to ask, given this person's emotional state at this moment, how should we be responding? You really gave me a softball, Diane, with that car rental thing. That's the perfect example. Think of just in terms of, again, coming back to somatic markers at work. When your customer is waiting in line fuming, she's laying the groundwork to fume at you whenever she sees you forever, right? It only took 10 draws and something as esoteric as drawing cards, 10 draws for you to start to feel an emotion that would automatically fire the next time you hovered over a deck. Well, the next time this customer is in line, even though things are going well, she's already going to be fuming. Why? Because her prefrontal cortex is firing that somatic marker. But the flip side to this is also true. And faced with a situation where people are in line, that's going to happen. Things go sideways. If you respond brilliantly, if your employees hustle out there, they shake hands, they apologize, they explain something unexpected happened, they feel terrible, they hate waiting in line, and they're going to do their best to get you out of there as quick as possible. People understand when things go wrong, but what you're really doing is not just watching her forgive you, but she's laying the groundwork for being forgiving of future mistakes and feeling positive emotion towards you in the future.
That's really incredible, Max. I think it's important, to understand this, and I think for me as a practitioner and all the other folks on the line with us, that how can we use this really critical component of somatic markers and the emotional and subconscious state?
I think a big part of it is just always reminding ourselves. I'll show you a little diagnostic tool we use that's very helpful as I kind of wrap up here. But I'll tell you, Dan, I think the biggest thing we can do is constantly remind ourselves that when the next time we're talking about how important emotions are to customer experience, to really nail that down. Why is it important? It's important because a positive emotional experience is laying down a marker that will fire very much like a macro the next time they see our logo, the next time they're in our place of business. So however we leave them feeling today, and the time after that, that telescopes out, that extends out into the future and guides future decisions in ways that are really important. There really are no throwaway experience. Everything is being recorded. Everything is driving those somatic markers. Let me show you this guy's great. His name is Robert Pluchik. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us. But many of you, I know, Diane, you're a fan of his work and his Wheel of Emotions. Many of you know him or you'll recognize his work when I show it to you here. Let's go ahead and advance and I'll show you what he's probably most famous for. He's famous for something called the Wheel of Emotions, which sounds like a game show, but it's not. It's just a real clear way of laying out on the table the spectrum, almost it's like a color wheel or something, the spectrum of human emotions. These are the basic 8 emotions. And I actually think if you could just click advance one more, you'll dim out everything but that kind of main center wheel. This is actually easier for me to look at it this way. You can see, there are 8 of these kind of leaves or whatever in the wheel. And they're the core 8 human emotions: joy, trust, fear, surprise, sadness, disgust, anger, and anticipation. And what's interesting, if you think about this, is they're all based in adaptive behavior, which enhance our survival. Antonio Damasio talks about Pluchik's work, and he says, what's interesting is these all evolved. We evolved to have these emotions, these biochemical reactions that we experience as emotions, because they helped us do one of 2 things: either deal with a threat, like a barking dog that was going to eat us alive, or deal with an opportunity, which is usually food or sex, right? Food or reproduction. These emotions all in some way or another help keep us alive in either threats or opportunities. And so they're all based on our survival. That's why you've developed this amazing ability to make quick decisions based on your emotion. And they all have 4 traits. If you kind of look at the next slide, you'll see that they're either positive or they're negative, right? And they're either primary or mixed. So you can see in kind of the upper right, primary ones are joy and trust. And a mixed emotion is the hybrid of the 2. Love is the hybrid of the 2. You can also see in the lower left hand disgust and sadness. And the kind of overlap of those 2 is remorse. So this is a really great way of seeing, look, this is the spectrum of emotions, and at their most intense in the center, as they radiate out, they become diffused. And I'll quickly show you again. I think if you kind of think about what Customerville does, we're in the business of helping people make very emotionally responsive and very vast, complex customer experience surveys that span the organization. But we want them to feel good, to be responsive to people. And so we're always, I'll literally put one of these wheels down. If I'm standing in the design studio where the designers are somewhere and I'm working with one of those groups, I'll slap that wheel down and say, let's look at what we're supposed to be doing in 3 ways. And you'll always kind of see these 3 boxes. Number 1, what emotion are we evoking, right? What was the game plan here? When our client if the client was an airline or a bank or an insurance company, at this point in the customer journey, what is happening now? We know what is happening because we've got their feedback in the survey. The next question is, what did we wish to evoke? What was our client hoping to have happen, right? And last but not least, what would be the right emotions to transmit back given the circumstances? You look at our marketing material, and we talk a lot about creating surveys that flex and respond. Well, that's all well and good, but what are you going to flex and respond to? So we always want to look at this wheel. It's just really, guiding your decisions and looking at what's happening in a customer experience, or if you're measuring it, looking at that thing, it's just shockingly effective. It can show you, hey, this is what we wanted to happen. This is what the customer is feeling. Go ahead and circle the words, circle the points that you believe they're feeling. And then it makes it very kind of crystal clear. This is what we should be transmitting back. In our case, we flex the art, the design, the language of the survey to respond as a human would. You do it as a human very naturally. But this wheel of emotion is just a tremendous diagnostic tool, a wonderful way to kind of overlay that on customer experience as you study it. I know you're a fan, a Pluchik fan, Diane. Isn't that cool?
That is really cool. I love the fact that we're talking about the emotions and then how it links to being able to look at what we're trying to accomplish. So I'm going to log back in. Can you all see? One more time. There we go. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about this science of emotion that drives business outcomes. So as I said before, Max and I have been talking a little bit about emotions and the importance and how they're created. And sometimes we forget as human beings, we have experiences every day, but when we walk into our place of business, we talk about processes and what we're trying to accomplish and metrics, which really doesn't account for the humanality of what we're trying to accomplish. So I want to share with you a couple of examples of how two brands have used emotion in the way that they actually design their customer experience programs and what they do in their organization. So the first one is Western Union looked at kind of their brand standards, their experience principles and design principles. And so in their call center, they looked at the scripts. So they said there's a huge interaction there. Transferring money is a very emotional experience, right? It's very basic to the human need. And so they wanted to take a look at the scripts and what they were creating in emotions, much like what you talked about, Max. So take a second and just read through this script. We apologize for insisting you answer questions about the source of your funds, but our compliance department needs to comply with regulations. Just check right now for that marker. What does that make you feel? How do you react to that emotionally, right? It feels very sterile and like it's not personal at all. So they went through a lot of their scripts and really all of their interactions, as Max was talking about, and really looked at, well, what emotion are we trying to create and how do we do that? So simply by rewriting the script guidance that they had, which was according to their brand and experience and design principles, this is what they came up with, the guidance. We're calling to inform you that your money is currently under review as a precaution to help protect you from possible consumer fraud. Completely different set of emotions just by changing the way the interaction goes. So very, very powerful ways that even when we think about the very simplest things really can evoke those markers in us and obviously impact our feelings about the brand and how we react to the brand.
So Diane, if that Western Union thing was if that was in one of our design studios and they slapped the Pluchik wheel of emotions on it, the left one, you'd say, well, what do we think this is evoking? And you'd be in the lower left hand, somewhere between the boredom and the kind of annoyance, the boredom and annoyance kind of pedals. And on the right, they've taken the same message and they've managed to transmit somewhere between trust and like serenity, right? Isn't that just a fabulous example of how you did the same thing, but managed to take something from making somebody feel essentially contempt to making them feel what sort of low-grade love? I mean, they like, hey, these guys are watching out for me. It's a great example.
Yeah, and it's exactly that lens, as I call it, that we put on the experience to say, how are you looking at this from an emotional lens, right? So it helps you to start to identify where you are and where you're doing. It's actually what we call emotional conversion, taking the state of the human and
Uh-huh.
going to a different state. And that's a positive marker that sticks with the brand and sticks with us in what my husband would call our lizard brains, right? This very basic human emotions and the reasoning that we have.
That's exactly right.
Thanks for that, Max. Another way that just, okay, so how do we get to some of that, right? How do we really know how they're feeling? We can guess, but United actually started with a net emotional value, right? So instead of, they still do net promoter score, but really it was, we really want to understand how they feel about the service. Instead of asking if they're likely to recommend us, which doesn't tell us anything, how do they actually feel about it? So this is actually gathering that information in real time after a flight or after an interaction with their associates or equipment or reservation system, and why they felt that way. So they actually had the emotions that you could select so that you could actually tell them what you were feeling at that time. So taking that lens one step further and really asking what the feeling was. One, it helped them identify positive or negatively with the brand. So if it was a positive, it reinforced it. But then if it was a negative, they began to understand what emotions they were creating so they could take those customers to emotional conversion by redesigning the experience. I mean, how cool is that, right? To start to just gather and ask people, how are you feeling, right? As a psychologist in my previous life, that's what you'd ask. You know, how do you feel about that? And that's exactly what helps us really understand where people are headed and why they do the things they do, and what we can do to improve the emotion associated with the brand. So we've talked a lot about we've talked a lot about emotions, and we've talked a lot about this, but I want to kind of bring this to bear for you in one of the things that it's really hard to convince executives, even though they're human beings themselves, and sharing this information. But what you've realized today, as we've talked about all this, is that everything that we do, whether it's pricing or marketing products or the service or people we hire, or the culture of our company, really drives how customers feel. In the end, they can get their functional needs met, but it's really about those emotional needs and how powerful they are. And as we as human beings, those emotions actually drive our behavior. So you heard Max talk a little bit about that health insurance company and the rental car company, right? It changes our behavior. If I eat somewhere at a restaurant and I have a bad experience and I feel disappointed and I feel like it was, I don't feel happy and I feel sad and I don't feel respected, I'm going to respond by not going back to that restaurant. I'm actually probably going to put a Yelp up and tell others about that bad experience. So what we do drives how people feel and how they then respond, which drives business results. So if they lose my business or Max's business for the rental car or the health insurance company, you can see now that the impact of that is, extended share of wallet or positive word of mouth, which we can tie dollars to now. So what we do drives feelings, drives behavior, drives impact to our business. So this is how emotions are really part of that value chain that we talk about and how we create value for our customers and our organizations. So in fact, studies, if you really start to equate this and really tie dollars to it, we all have seen statistics like this, but this is one that was done by Bruce Temkin on consumers who had experience with negative emotions versus those who had positive emotions with a brand. 15 times more likely to recommend a company, 8.4 times more likely to trust the company, 7.1 times more likely to purchase more from a company. So that emotion drives behavior, drives business results. If we quantify this, that they're more likely to, they currently spend X with us and they're going to spend 7 times more than that, we can actually begin to build a business case around why emotions are important and how they drive that behavior and therefore drive business results. So in closing, we wanted to just kind of share and merge these things together. We've talked about, the rational and conscious. We've talked about somatic markers. We've talked about emotion and the importance of that in business. And we want to really challenge you to really think about some of the things you learned today. Get the book from Customerville, read it, begin to incorporate it, think about what emotions you're creating and how that drives your business results, and really build that emotion into your organization. There's obviously more resources for Customerville. They've put several webinars and guides that are out there, a lot about how understanding the touch point, again, of that feedback is important, but then also just a lot about the emotion and how it plays into our response and our interactions with brands. And then, as he said, there's also the Descartes error and design-driven feedback that you can get going through the book club at customerville.com. So a bit more information to help you support you in your craft.
Guys, it's freely available to certainly CXPA members, but I think we're actually opening up for everybody. The pro resources area on our website, we share all of our research and all this kind of work, which is usually very different than you're used to seeing, from behavioral science to how Asperger's research or stage acting techniques can impact customer experience. There's a lot of really unique content, and it's freely available. So by all means, check it out on our website, and do take us up on the offer to send you Descartes Air and our soon-to-be-released published book, Design-Driven Feedback.
Hey, Erica, are you still on the line with us? We can open it up for questions if there are any through the attendees, the webinar.
Yes, we do have a few questions coming in. Brandon asked, the messaging around emotional is a very difficult pitch to executives focused more on the tangible. How have you been successful in overcoming this challenge?
I'll take that one first. And what you see as part of what I presented was actually what I would use in organizations to begin to just educate people and really make it relative to them about their lives, right? Like, would you do this to your mom, or would you would you want to be treated like this? That golden rule, right? Would you want to experience this if you were going through the process? And actually, having executives go and actually try to do things on the web, or go and visit a store and actually have those experiences customers have every day, and then help them recognize that emotional piece and that human piece is really critical. And then tying that together with, well, we're driving behavior by that. People are upset on social media. They're telling other people. There's a huge impact to brands from that. So trying to really give them examples and then quantifying that, right? If we have people who are frustrated, like with United, if they were frustrated and their flights with us decreased, we've just lost customer lifetime value with them. We probably have bad social media, which impacts us negatively in a quantitative dollar way. With executives particularly, you kind of have to talk that language. But eventually, just as you probably did today, you start to recognize that we're talking about human beings. We're talking about whether we interact with an organization or a brand. It's really critical that we care for these emotions. That's what really drives us as human beings. Max, anything to share?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you completely. I think, one of the things that really jumps out to me, and I think this was Brandon's question, was that Temkin slide. We look at this in a couple of ways. We look at it in terms of when you're emotionally connecting with people, we get a lot better feedback. So you get more feedback and you get higher quality feedback. And that's true of consumers, but also in LVHV. I guess for those of you who don't know that term, LVHV is low volume, high value feedback, like B2B feedback. If you're making that connection, people engage with you and you get more of what you want. But I think that the Temkin group had some wonderful research, especially in the last year. And you cited some of it, Diane, back a few slides. Maybe we can even go back to it, where a customer who had an experience with that positive experience was 15 times more likely to recommend the company, which is remarkable. They're 7 times more likely to purchase from you. They're almost 8 more times likely to try products and services. So I acknowledge the point that the audience member was making, which is that it's sometimes difficult to pitch that to executives. What we'd say is, you've got to show up armed with statistics. We want you armed with being able to explain why that there is a difference in economic outcome, and this is it. And if they ask you, gosh, I wonder why that is, we want you to be able to talk about Antonio Damasio and how when you have one good experience or 2 good experiences, you've mapped yourself, kind of put yourself on autopilot to choose the brand of the company in the future.
Great, we're having some other questions come in. Another question asked by Kathy, does Customerville conduct any conferences or forums to expand on this approach?
Sure, there are two great ways to kind of keep up to speed on our latest thinking on this. The first is we do what is more or less a monthly coffee break webinar series, and they're just a ton of fun. They're always going to be something that's very different, very unique content. So you can sign up for those on the website. You can also go to customerville.com, go to our pro resources area, and you can listen to past recorded ones. And also, I know generally we try and keep these webinars timeless, but I'd be remiss if I didn't say we're going to be thrilled to see everybody in the month of May at the upcoming Insights Exchange in Phoenix, and we're going to throw a party like no party at the Wrigley Mansion. I think we're throwing this thing at. So we'll have some concrete examples that are fun while you have a drink in your hand. So if you show up at the Insights Exchange, you'll get a firsthand example at the party. And by the way, you can also just call us anytime or email us. I think we're going to distribute these slides. Our information's on there. And we're always thrilled to just hop on a call, hop on a webinar. This is what we do. It's our life's work. We've been doing it for 13 years, and we have clients of all types and all sizes all over the world. So by all means, give us a call.
Excellent. Brenda asks, in a B2B environment, does it make sense to survey customers with regard to getting a baseline of what emotions they have pertaining to the company or brand? In other words, how can we quantify where customers are specifically within the brand?
Do you want me to answer that, Diane?
Sure.
It absolutely does. We did a webinar recently on low volume, high value feedback, LVHV feedback. And look, here's how people make this harder than it has to be. If you could personally, if we could clone you and you could sit down with every single B2B customer, buy them a cup of coffee or put a glass of wine in their hand, look them straight in the eye, give them all your attention and ask them these questions, they would tell you, right? And so there are some really interesting techniques where you can create that level of connection. And I'll throw you a couple of quick examples, but you can create that level of connection and ask them for the truth. Ask them in ways that count. And so one way is, rather than send them a survey, because people don't respond to brands, they respond to people, create a human interlocutor. So if you're big enough to have a company historian, you might have a survey that's guided by the company historian, where you say, look, this is really important. You need to know these things because it helps shape our decisions in the future for all of my colleagues and coworkers in this company and for the way we provide our services to you. And make it human like that. When you do that, you're inviting a higher level. That's one technique that we'll use to get a higher level of engagement where they really will honestly answer questions about the emotions that you elicit in them. And I think in that webinar, we even give some examples where you can ask people. We use like a Nike and a Ferrari example where you can ask people which emotions they feel at that moment, and they'll tell you.
Excellent. We had another question come in. Which of the coaching tools do you recommend to train front-end staff to evoke those emotions we want from our clients? Are there any tools that you would recommend for frontline employees?
I think there's probably some, we can come up with some resources to post as well. I can't off the top of my head give you all of them, but there are some things around emotional intelligence. I think it would be a good topic to look at. There is some training about figuring out kind of where you are on the emotional intelligence scale, because if you think about it, it's really helping those frontline folks to understand the human on the other side and not only feel empathetic, because I think that's just one piece of it, but really try to understand what emotions they're creating, look at that conversion piece. So that would be one topic that I'm happy to pull a few things that we find that could be relative to it and post those along with the webinar to give people a little bit more detail behind that. There's a lot out there, but we'll find some things that are relative and get those up.
Yeah, I think the other thing is that we see, this is, I'm just being very transparent, this is a pitfall in my industry, in the enterprise feedback industry. We tend to want to generate reports, right? We're going to fire off surveys, and then we're going to fire off reports. And there's some problems with that. If as you look at what coaching techniques, you ask yourself, I think what you're really asking is, how do I get my frontline employees to respond at a higher emotional level, to create these connections? Part of that is the coaching, the coaching techniques you use, the partners that you work with to coach your staff. But frankly speaking, your employees want to do this well. If you can put information about the emotional consequences of their actions and inactions in a meaningful way into their hands, very often they'll self-correct. People, there are very few, bad employees, lazy employees. More often than not, people want to do well. They just need something to hang their hat on. And so if you can show them, the Plutchik's Wheel of Emotions is a fun diagnostic tool. It's very useful. But it's just by way of saying that if you can find ways to show as quickly as possible your employees what's happening, put them in the emotional state of mind of that customer, they'll respond in a very human way and they'll self-correct. That's not a management challenge, that's a leadership challenge.
Good point, Max. Erica?
Yeah, I hope we didn't lose Erica there. It looks like we've.
I think we may have.
I'm still here. Thank you very much for joining today.
That's good. I was suddenly terrified. I placed the somatic marker right there.
Exactly. Well, if you'd like to learn more about today's session, we'll be sending out a recording of the material, so you're welcome to check back. Otherwise, we do encourage you to reach out to Customerville or the CXPA to learn more. So once again, thank you, Diane, thank you, Max, and thank you to Customerville for today's presentation. And we look forward to seeing you on future webinars or future events. So thanks again.
It was a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, everybody, for coming today.